let's dissect some of what has come out tonight from that IEC briefing, including what we're seeing there as reported by Aphumelelo, Dr. Hlengiwe Ndlovu, Dr. Stembile Mbete, Dr. Dale McKinley. I'm in the presence of doctors, political analysts are joining us live right now. Thank you so much to you all for your time. I'm going to start with you, Dr. McKinley. I mean, you think about the fact that right now, there's residents who are having to use their phones to try and vote. And this is just under half an hour away to go. How does it all look?
Well, it doesn't look great. I mean, you know, there was promises. You were talking about that earlier, undertakings by ESCOM and the IEC. That obviously hasn't been the case because it's more than just one station. It shouldn't have happened. They should have had contingency plans in place. And even though it's not widespread, I think it's important that every single vote counts. Every single person must be treated with respect. It doesn't matter where you live, if it's your rural or urban area. So it's disappointing. I think that's the main thing. I don't think it brings into question the legitimacy of the elections, but it's disappointing and it shouldn't happen again.
Dr. Mbete, while even the IEC is saying that it's doing all it can, and of course a number of people saying largely they are quite happy with the process, but the realm of speculation could be further fueled by the fact that we're seeing power cuts in some of 20 voting stations in the Free State?
Yeah, but you know, the IEC doesn't control the power cuts. And so that's an important thing to remember also, is that the state had given assurances that we wouldn't be seeing any blackouts, and that should have also filtered down to municipalities. So there's a big question about why that is happening. But the point I think that Dale has made is an important one, that there should be contingency measures in place in case those sorts of things happen. I also think that this was a far more administratively complex election than the IEC has had to run at national and provincial level. And I think that what we have seen is also some of the difficulties with, you remember that the Electoral Act, the amended act, was still being challenged until, December. I think the full confirmation that this was going to be the law that we were going to be using in its form was in February of this year. And so there's a lot, I think, that has combined, and it's sort of a perfect storm. Should the IEC have thought of some things better, have anticipated some of these challenges? Of course they should have. But I think that, it's a combination of issues that have all conflated in order to get us here. One of the things I think that's important to emphasize is that the amendment to Section 24A that has gotten us here, that was passed in December of 2020. We have had this law in place in its current form for over 3 years. And the political parties, the 14 represented parties in the National Assembly, passed it. And so, should there have been more done to let people know about it? Of course there should have. But also, the parties that are contesting in this election, particularly the ones that were represented in the National Assembly for the last 5 years, surely should take some responsibility for not preparing their own electorate for it.
Would you agree with that, Dr. Ndlovu, especially when even tonight I had a conversation with a colleague of mine in Zanin who's talking about farm workers who could not go to vote because the Section 24A, they were not aware of it. They did not know that they needed to complete the forms. And then they don't have the money to now go to where they are supposed to be voting. So how much responsibility should political parties also be taking for this?
Absolutely. I think political parties should actually take a responsibility because they are the ones who are doing the canvassing, especially at community level. So if you have a constituency and you are really looking for their support as your base, you should do the work. However, at the same time, I don't think everyone in South Africa who's wanting to vote is actually aligned to a particular political party. So also I think there needed to be some level of education around these elections. So there's been elections education or voter education, but also at the same time, we know the level of literacy in this country and how much people engage actually with the constitution, with the amendments and all of that. Sometimes they become part of the broader news, but at the same time we can ask how many people read those news, especially now we're talking about farm workers. It is quite possible that no one could have reached there in terms of educating them. So I think it's a collective responsibility really from the IEC, from the government, and also from the political parties as well.
Dr. McKinley, earlier on I was in conversation with Professor Lesiba Tifo, who was also saying, as well as Dr. Ndlovu, who was saying that for them, in fact Dr. Fikile Vilakazi, they were saying that for them, what was also concerning, especially around voter education, is the amount of time that the IEC would have had, especially after the election was declared in terms of the date. They were also saying that for them, that also impacted, that maybe had the date been declared sooner, the IEC would have been able to do its work sooner. Do you agree?
I do. I mean, I think that it was quite late in the day, relatively speaking, when the election was declared. And as Sitambile said, that this was a very complex election in many ways, and the IEC had its work cut out for it. And in overall terms, they've done a decent job, but there are clearly some gaps and there are clearly some failures. And I think information sharing is one of those things. We should now, 30 years on, 7 elections on, we should get this right. I think in most cases, and particularly the far-flung areas, the rural areas, the places where people don't have access to the social media, don't have access to the usual forms of communication. We need to, and this is, I think, a general problem, not just with voter education, but with political education, generally speaking.
So are we leaving them behind then, Dr. Betty? Are we leaving those people in rural areas behind there?
Yes, we are. And I think that, a concern for me around the way in which this, firstly, this amendment to that Section 24 was passed and was during COVID, is also that there didn't seem to be a lot of discussion about what the impact of it would be on people in far-flung areas, in rural areas, people who are migrant workers. I was listening to the interview that you had earlier, with my colleagues, where, we are a migratory population, particularly because of our economic circumstances and how difficult it is to get employment. And so all of those factors didn't factor into the original debate on this. And so we're now sitting with the consequences of that. And the issue is that the people that should be taking responsibility for this, yes, the IEC, but also the parties that were part of passing this law. Let's remember, the IEC doesn't pass its own laws. Parliament does. Members of Parliament are the ones who discuss, debate, and decide which laws they're going to pass. They are the ones who made this law. And it's now going to be very difficult for the IEC to then say, well, we'll break the law in order to accommodate all of these people who are excluded by a law that was passed by the politicians.
So, Dr. Ndlovu, how do we begin then to strike a balance there? I mean, it is a law, it has been passed, the voter education is also important, the democratic rights of citizens is also important. So how do we begin to speak to one another so that, we get to a point where there's a seamless operation here?
So I think there needs to be an understanding of the complexities of South Africa as a country, its historical past, and in terms of how is it affecting, the everyday functioning of the state. If we go back to the histories of migrant labor in South Africa, had we have thought about that and how we are factoring into that, because for all we care, someone could have, thought they would be home during this voting time, and then there is high unemployment and all of that, and then the job suddenly comes and then someone hops and then they move. I think it's quite also important that we also understand beyond the level of literacies that I've spoken to before, but also in terms of the marginalization of these communities who remain at the margins of the South African society. So there hasn't been a collective effort in bringing the South African society together, so much that when we begin to speak about these changes, we are carrying everyone with.
So two things arise for me from what you're saying, and I'm going to get to the first one then. Dr. Mbete, if then we are, still having this conversation around Section 24, earlier on, I was listening and hearing of a soldier, for example, who was talking about the fact that they were deployed just on the eve, just as Section 24 applications closed. Then they did not anticipate the fact that they were going to be in a different province come voting day. What happens then there? Because I don't know, it looks like no provision has been made.
No provision has been made. And the responsibility for making the provision lies with the IEC. Remember, there was a whole regulations process last year where there was public comment around the regulations and what their impact would be, and where also political parties were allowed to weigh in on the regulations and say whether they were acceptable or not. And this is where we ended up. And I think that this gets, I think, to a much broader issue around the collective governance crisis that we face as a country, where we have a lot of decisions that are made officially by politicians, by administrations, where those people are not held to account for the decisions that they're making. This is a governance failure.
Dr. McKinley, I'm listening to what Dr. Ndlovu had to say. The second part of what arose for me is that 30 years on, if we're still talking about the makeup of South Africa, we still don't understand the complexities of where we are coming from. Does it mean we are now at a place where we are putting these things on the table, we're able to talk frankly about them, or does it symbolize that maybe we dropped the ball somewhere and did not focus on what we should have?
Well, the first thing I wanted to say is, as far as I understand it, there was a special dispensation that was made for people to appeal to the IEC. I think 300,000 people took advantage of that dispensation who could vote in different areas. But again, it was an information sharing problem. Yeah. So there was a measure that was put into place, but it wasn't obviously known well enough. But in terms of your question, I think we are at the stage where we now, in some ways, these elections are watershed in different ways. It's not just about 50 political parties, the ANC possibly losing its majority. I think in our political discourse, we are now less afraid of saying things and criticizing and being open. And 20 years ago, we might not have wanted to say these things because we wanted to sort of, the election process was so precious to us. And now it is still very important, but it's important that we improve and we learn. And I think that's the real issue. And let me say this, is that there's another party that, in case of the Limpopo example, that is the farm owners themselves, the employers. The employers themselves have a responsibility to their workers to make sure that they can exercise their democratic rights and to give them the necessary information. And I know from visiting many, many farms in rural areas that those conditions don't exist in most cases. So there needs to be more communication intergovernmentally, as well as with not only Department of Labor, IEC, Parliament. Everybody needs to come together on this because elections are for everyone. It's not specifically an IEC competency.
Dr. Ndlovu, let me come back to you. I'm very disheartened listening to that someone who was supposed to assist an elderly person cast their vote right where this elderly person is asking for is actually doing something wrong. And then I remember as well in KwaZulu-Natal, where we also got to hear about an IEC official who was driving around without an escort. These are basic things that some of the officials should be trusted with.
I think, Bongo, this is a problem that we are faced with in South Africa in terms of issues of good governance. What does good governance mean? Simple things as ethics at work, simple things as maintaining the integrity of whatever process that we are tasked with. But also there is a question of accountability as well. So if these are officials who are trusted with this huge process and then they are busy flaunting rules, it's so worrying because I think the IEC has been trying by all means to maintain the integrity of these elections, and hence they've been giving updates and trying very hard to make them work. But also it's not something that we're only observing within these elections. It's something that is very prone, even with some other public servants who are supposed to be doing their work every day. So some of the issues that have really, angered many South Africans who are saying I've been voting, but I don't even see the reason why I continue to vote because of these issues that can be seen as mundane, but they have a ripple effect in terms of how South Africans are then taking even this democracy and what it means to go and waste your time in a ballot box to vote.
Let me give you a minute each, Dr. Mbete and Dr. McKinley, because we're out of time. So how do you respond to something like that?
Look, it's a bigger question than this election because it points to a real fundamental lack of professional ethics, of pride, of commitment to your work. And I think that that's a bigger problem than just this election.
Dr. McKinley?
Yeah, I would say that we need better preparation and we need to have better screening. The IEC employed over 200,000 people for this election.
Yeah.
So it's a hard ask to make sure that everybody is doing exactly what they want. We've seen this within many other parts of the public service, even including the police themselves. So I think it speaks to a larger challenge, not just these elections. We need a much more professionalized service. We need to give ourselves more time and more training. And I think that it's not going to make every single thing go away and all the problems, but it'll make people trust the system. And I think that's the key thing, is trust in the system.
You speak about professionalization. That is in and itself a thesis,
Yes.
all on itself. But let me thank you so much to you all for your time. I mean, it really is, as you say, one of those moments where we can all feel it. We can feel how big of a moment this is. And I suppose in the coming days, then a lot of South Africans are waiting then to see which direction things do go. But thank you so much, and for always being available to make sense of it all. You can see on your screens there, around 7 minutes left for you to be able to make your way to a voting station. Time is fast running out. I certainly hope you are near a voting station, so you are then you're going to be able to then cast your vote. So do understand that, of course, our colleagues are standing by to bring you the very latest, but at the same time, there is, of course, rolling coverage that we'll be bringing for you here on SABC News, so you do not miss an inch of what is taking place here in this election. So let me thank Dr. Ndlovu and also Dr. Dale McKinley, as well as Dr. Stembile Mbete, who were all trying to help us make sense of this briefing tonight.